Close your eyes now. Let the noise of the day fall away like rain leaving the window. Breathe in slowly and let it go. You've done enough. The world can wait. Tonight, we'll drift together into a quieter time, a land before clocks, before cities, before names. Let your mind wander across wide rivers, uncut forests and skies untouched by smoke. This is not history. This is rest. Long before the idea of America was spoken, the continent was already alive, breathing in the rhythm of wind, water, and firelight. The year was somewhere in the 1400s, though no one who lived then cared much for years. Time was marked by the seasons, by the flight of birds, by the way snow gathered on the branches of pine trees. Across this vast, untamed world, countless nations thrived, each with its own language, song, and way of listening to the earth. To the east, great forests stretched for miles, whispering above villages built of bark and cedar. In the plains, where the sky touched the horizon, people followed the movement of the bison and learned to live in motion. To the south, sandstone cliffs held entire cities carved by hand, where families gathered under painted ceilings to tell stories of creation and endurance. And far to the north and west, the ocean fed the coastal tribes, its tides carrying salmon, driftwood, and the quiet hum of eternity. There were no borders, no flags, no words for discovery. Only belonging to the land, to the clan, to the spirit that lived within every river and stone. Children learned not through books, but through watching, the way elders bent toward the soil before planting, or how hunters placed their hands upon the necks of the animals they thanked. Life was not measured by what was owned, but by how well one could listen. To the thunder, the silence, and to each other. Tonight, as you lie still, imagine that older silence, the one that lived before noise. Imagine the smell of rain on red clay, the slow drift of smoke from a hearth, the low rhythm of a drum echoing over the hills. Let your thoughts move as the rivers moved, steady, patient, unhurried. This story will not rush you. It will carry you gently, like water in the dark. So breathe, and let us begin our journey through the land before it had a name. Chapter 1: The Land Before Names. The land was older than memory. It stretched beneath the sky like a sleeping animal. Mountains curled like the backs of whales, rivers winding like slow silver veins. Before the word America ever existed, before maps drew lines, before sails cut across the ocean, this place already had a rhythm. It breathed, it listened, it waited. In the 15th century, what we now call the United States was a mosaic of worlds. Forests so deep they swallowed the sun, plains that seemed to have no end, deserts of whispering stone, coasts where fog rose like breath from the sea. There were no cities, no engines, no written borders. But there was order, a kind of natural intelligence shaped by thousands of years of life unfolding in silence. The people who lived here did not call themselves Indians. They had no single name, for they were not one nation, but hundreds, each with its own tongue, its own stories, its own way of being. To the Iroquois, the forest was a cathedral of living pillars. To the Navajo, the desert was a song written by wind and time. To the people of the Pacific coast, the sea itself was an ancestor, vast, moody, and filled with memory. The air then was thicker, richer, alive with the scent of pine sap and smoke. Elk moved through the valleys, wolves sang beneath the moon, eagles wheeled over rivers that had never been dammed. The stars shone so sharply that travelers could read the seasons by their shimmer. Each dawn was greeted not by alarm clocks but by the call of birds, the crackle of fire, and the murmured prayers of those who rose early to give thanks. Gratitude was not an act of worship. It was a way of living. To plant a seed was to speak to the earth. To drink from a stream was to promise respect. Everything had its spirit. Everything had meaning. Children learned early that silence was a form of wisdom. They watched their elders weave baskets or shape arrowheads, the rhythm of their hands steady and sure. They listened to stories told by firelight, tales of coyote tricksters, of mountains that walked, of rivers that once spoke. Stories were not entertainment. They were instruction, moral compass, memory. Each one carried the heartbeat of the tribe. At night, the world was not dark. It was blue, alive with the silver breath of the moon. Villages glowed softly from the fires burning in longhouses or clay dwellings built into canyon walls. There was laughter, low and warm. There was song. There was the hum of drums that echoed across the land like the pulse of time itself. And when storms rolled over the plains or lightning split the sky, the people did not hide in fear. They stood beneath it and watched, knowing that thunder was the earth reminding them of its strength. Nature was not an enemy to be conquered. It was a companion, sometimes fierce, sometimes kind, but always alive. In this land without borders, travel was guided by instinct. Hunters followed the stars and animal tracks. Traders moved between nations carrying obsidian, turquoise, salt, and stories. There were paths, invisible to outsiders, that connected the continent like threads in a vast woven cloth. Through them, ideas traveled, methods of farming, rituals of peace, songs of birth and mourning. To live in this time was to live close to the bone of existence. Every meal was earned, every season uncertain, yet life thrived not because of dominance, but because of balance. The people knew how to take only what was needed, to leave enough for tomorrow, and to walk softly so the land would remember them kindly. As the fire burned low each evening, someone would always look up at the stars and wonder if the ancestors were still watching. They believed the spirits of the dead traveled among the constellations, whispering advice through the rustle of leaves and the crackle of flames. To live well was to honor those whispers, to keep the world turning in harmony. When sleep came, it was deep and dreamless like the land itself. The wind outside the shelters carried stories from far away. The sigh of the plains, the laughter of rivers, the soft drumming of rain on hides, and somewhere in that stillness, in that endless night before the ships, before the flags, before the noise of a new world, the land kept breathing, waiting for footsteps it could not yet imagine. Chapter 2: The Forest Nations of the East. In the East, the world was green. Not the bright green of gardens or parks, but a deep, endless green, a cathedral of leaves stretching toward the sky. From the Atlantic coast to the Great Lakes, forests rolled in every direction, thick with maple, oak, and birch. The air smelled of pine resin and rain-soaked earth. Every step was cushioned by moss. Every breeze carried the whisper of 1,000 unseen wings. Here, the people of the forest, the Iroquois, the Algonquin, the Wampanoag, and many others, built their lives between the roots and rivers. Their homes were longhouses, made from cedar frames and bark, long enough to hold several families and generations beneath one roof. Smoke rose from the center, curling through the rafters like a prayer returning to the sky. Each village was a small universe. The elders were the keepers of memory, the storytellers and judges of peace. Women tended the crops, corn, beans and squash, known lovingly as the Three Sisters. They believed these plants were sisters who helped each other grow, the corn standing tall, the beans winding upward, the squash spreading wide to shade the soil. To plant them was not just agriculture, it was a ceremony, a renewal of trust with the earth. Men hunted deer and bear, paddled birch canoes across still lakes, and returned with stories as much as food. The Iroquois were known for their diplomacy and unity. They formed a great confederacy, a council of nations bound not by conquest but by agreement. Their great law of peace was a philosophy older than most European governments, a belief that harmony among people mirrored harmony with the land. Decisions were made slowly with silence until all voices were heard. No one raised their tone. The forest taught them patience. At dusk, the villages glowed with the light of hearth fires. Children chased each other in the clearing until the first stars appeared. Then, slowly, the elders began to speak. Their voices were low and measured, carrying tales of the sky woman who fell from the clouds and gave birth to the world. They spoke of animals who had once talked, of rivers that remembered every name spoken beside them. The stories were not only to entertain, they were a way of remembering what it meant to belong. In these forests, everything lived in relationship. The rivers gave fish, so offerings of tobacco were returned to the water in thanks. When a tree was cut, a prayer was whispered first, so that its spirit would not leave in anger. Even the animals were believed to choose when they would give themselves to hunters. A hunt that failed was not a misfortune. It was a message to wait. Seasons moved like long breaths. In spring, the people gathered sap from maple trees to make syrup, a sweetness to mark the end of winter's hunger. In summer, they held festivals, dances for the sun, for planting, for healing. The rhythm of drums echoed through the forest like the heart of the earth itself. Autumn brought harvest, and with it the sound of gratitude. Winter was a season of firelight, when families retreated indoors to share warmth, repair tools, and tell the old stories again and again. No one lived alone. The Iroquois word onwehonwe meant real people, a reminder that identity was shared, not owned. Each person was a thread in the great fabric of community, and even the smallest action could tear or strengthen it. When conflict arose, peacemakers stepped forward. One story tells of a man who carried a white wampum belt, a belt made of shell beads symbolizing truth, across many nations, teaching them to bury their weapons beneath the roots of a tree of peace. From that tree's branches, an eagle watched forever to warn when danger approached. Such was the poetry of their politics, woven with symbols, guided by vision, rooted in patience. The forest nation saw time differently. The future was not a line stretching forward, it was a circle. The actions of one generation rippled into the next, like stones thrown into still water. Every decision was made with the seventh generation in mind, how it would affect those not yet born. This quiet foresight shaped their laws, their wars, their songs. It made them cautious with power and generous with gratitude. Nights were gentle. When snow covered the ground, the sound of footsteps disappeared, replaced by the crack of firewood and the murmur of stories. Smoke rose through the holes in the longhouse roofs, carrying human breath into the frozen stars. To fall asleep, then, was to dream among the trees. The lullaby of wind through pine branches blending with the soft rhythm of life, continuing just as it always had. If you listen closely, perhaps you can still hear it. That ancient breathing of the forest, the slow language of roots and rivers. Even now, when highways cut across the land and cities hum with light, there are corners of the east where the silence remains. Beneath the soil, seeds of memory sleep, waiting for the warmth of recognition. And when the world feels too loud, when your thoughts race and your heart grows tired, remember that once there was a time when people measured their days by birdsong and their worth by how gently they walked. The forest still remembers them. And if you're quiet enough, it will remember you too. Chapter 3. The Great Plains and the People of the Bison. If the eastern forests were a whisper, then the heart of the continent was a breath, wide, slow, and endless. The Great Plains stretched farther than the eye could follow, a sea of grass that rolled beneath a sky so vast it felt holy. There were no mountains here to block the wind, no walls of trees to hold the sound, only space. And in that space life learned how to move. For those who lived upon it, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Pawnee, the Arapaho, and many others, the land was not something to own. It was a pulse, a rhythm, an inheritance shared between people, wind, and the great herds of bison that roamed like drifting clouds. To follow the bison was to follow life itself. The people did not wander aimlessly. They followed the ancient migration routes that had existed for centuries before memory began. Morning began in silence, broken only by the cry of hawks circling above the prairie. Tents made from buffalo hide, called teepees, glowed gold beneath the first light of dawn. Inside, the smell of smoke and earth mingled as families stirred. There were no clocks, no fences, no written laws, yet everything had order. The rhythm of survival, hunt, prepare, give thanks, move, shaped each day with quiet precision. The bison was the center of all things. Its meat fed the people, its hide clothed them, sheltered them, carried their babies, its bones became needles and tools, its sinew became thread, even its spirit was woven into prayers. Before a hunt began, a ceremony was held, drums sounded, songs rose into the wind, and smoke from burning sage drifted into the open sky. It was not a plea for success, but a request for harmony, that the life taken would continue within the life that remained. The hunt itself was poetry in motion. Riders moved with the herds, not against them, their horses blending into the rolling plains like wind over water. Every arrow, every breath, every heartbeat had purpose. When the hunt ended, nothing was wasted. Children gathered the small bones, elders offered tobacco to the earth. Life was not measured by possession, but by respect. At night, fires lit the plains like constellations scattered upon the ground. Men told stories of the Great Spirit, of the trickster Iktomi who wove webs of fate, of dreams that came on the wings of eagles. Women sewed robes embroidered with beads that shimmered like stars. The rhythm of drums echoed far into the night, and if you lay very still, it felt as if the earth itself was keeping time with the music. The plains people lived in circles. Circles of camps, circles of dances, circles of thought. To them, the circle was sacred because it mirrored the way of the world, the sun rising and setting, the seasons turning, the generations repeating. Life and death were not opposites, but companions walking hand in hand. Even in grief, there was song. Even in silence, there was prayer. Children learned through imitation, not instruction. They watched their mothers stretch hides, their fathers mend arrows, their grandparents tell stories so old that no one remembered who first spoke them. Through those stories, they learned courage, kindness, and restraint. The quiet strength of moving in harmony with all things. The plains were not always gentle. Storms could rise without warning, thunderheads towering like mountains, lightning splitting the sky into white fire. But the people did not curse the weather. They watched it, read it, learned from it. The wind that could flatten tents in one moment could also carry the scent of rain to thirsty ground. Balance was everywhere if one looked long enough. Each summer, tribes would gather for the sun dance, a ceremony of renewal and endurance. Drums pounded like hearts, dancers fasted, prayed, and looked toward the rising sun with open eyes and unwavering faith. They offered themselves not in pain but in gratitude. It was said that through suffering, one remembered that life was a gift. Through endurance, one honored the world. When winter came, the camps grew smaller. Snow covered the grass, the bison moved south, and families huddled close around fires that told their own stories through crackle and spark. The world outside turned white and quiet, but inside the teepees, warmth lived in laughter and song. Children traced patterns in the smoke that rose through the opening above, believing the spirits would see them and smile. There was beauty in that simplicity, in knowing the land so deeply that you needed no compass, no clock, no map. The stars guided you, the wind spoke. The earth remembered your footsteps. And as you slept beneath the endless sky, you could almost feel the planet turning, slow, ancient, patient, carrying you gently into another dawn. Some nights, when the herds were near, the ground itself trembled with their movement, thousands upon thousands of hooves beating the earth like drums. The people would wake, step outside, and watch the living river of bison pass beneath the moon. No one spoke. No one needed to. They simply stood, wrapped in blankets of fur, breathing in the sacred silence of belonging. Because here, on the Great Plains, no one truly owned the land. The land owned them. And in that surrender, they found something the modern world has long forgotten: peace. Chapter 4. The Desert Builders of the Southwest. When the land turns to stone, life must learn the language of patience. In the deserts of the Southwest, in what we now call New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Utah and Colorado, the earth was carved by time into mesas, canyons, and rivers that glowed red beneath the sun. Days burned with heat, nights dropped into cold silence. Yet within this seeming emptiness, people built civilizations of astonishing grace and endurance. The ancestral Pueblo, the Hopi, and the Zuni were among them, desert architects who made the rock itself their companion. They did not fight the land, they listened to it. They read the movement of the sun, the path of the wind, the memory of rivers long vanished. Where others might see desolation, they saw design. Their homes rose from the cliffs like extensions of the earth, intricate cities built into canyon walls, stacked in tiers, glowing gold at sunrise and deep crimson by dusk. These were the Pueblos, and their walls still whisper stories when the wind passes through. In places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, entire communities were built of stone and mud mortar, with chambers for living, storage, and worship. Every beam, every step, every carved niche was placed with sacred intention. Life here was a dialogue with scarcity. Water was precious, each drop gathered in clay jars, each rainfall remembered in song. Crops of corn, beans, and squash were coaxed from dry soil by patience, prayer, and ingenious irrigation channels that guided the desert's fleeting rain into the roots of life. To plant a seed was to enter a covenant with the sun and sky, a promise that work, faith, and waiting would be enough. In the cool shadows of their cliff dwellings, families worked and rested together. Women shaped pottery from the earth. Smooth, symmetrical, painted with spirals and feathers to honor the spirits. Men carved tools from stone, hunted rabbits, or traded turquoise for salt, feathers, and stories with travelers from distant lands. Children learned early the rhythm of the desert: wake before dawn, rest when the sun stands highest, listen always for the wind. Spiritual life flowed through everything. The people believed that the world above and below were connected by breath, that humans stood between the sky and the underworld, keepers of balance. Their kivas, circular underground chambers, were built as bridges between worlds. In these sacred spaces, rituals of song and dance echoed by torchlight, prayers rose through small openings in the ceiling, and smoke carried hopes to the stars. The desert tested them, but it also revealed beauty in restraint. There were no lush forests, no endless rivers, yet within the silence of sand and sky, they found clarity. They learned that abundance can exist without excess, and that endurance can be an art form. To live here was to live slowly, deliberately, with respect for the fragile thread that held life together. Evenings came suddenly in the desert. The light softened, shadows stretched long across the cliffs. Fires flickered in the courtyards as people gathered to eat and tell stories. The stars, countless and sharp, emerged above them like seeds scattered across dark soil. In that vastness, the people felt neither alone nor small. They were part of a greater pattern, woven into the rhythm of seasons, stars, and sand. Their calendars were not written in books, but traced in sunlight. At Chaco Canyon, great houses aligned perfectly with the solstices. When the sun rose on the longest day, a single shaft of light would pierce through stone openings and strike a carved spiral. Proof that their architecture was not just shelter, but prayer made permanent. They understood time as motion, light as language, and stone as memory. When drought came, and it often did, they did not curse the sky. They packed their belongings, closed their kivas with ritual care, and moved toward new lands. Each migration was not an ending, but a continuation, like water shifting course. They carried with them not wealth or possessions, but stories, pottery, and seeds, the real treasures of survival. Even now, centuries later, the ruins remain, silent, sun-bleached, untouched by centuries of wind. But if you stand there at dusk, you can still feel it, the quiet hum of human hands that once shaped the desert into home. The air still smells faintly of smoke, the walls still hold warmth from the setting sun, and in the distance, the coyotes still sing to the stars. The desert remembers. It remembers the builders who trusted the silence. It remembers the people who learned that beauty can live in emptiness. And if you listen long enough, beneath the slow rhythm of your own breathing, you may hear what they heard. The patient voice of the earth saying, "Be still, you are enough." Chapter 5. The Voices of the Pacific. On the far western edge of the continent, where the forests meet the sea, the world changes its rhythm once more. The air grows heavy with mist, and the ocean breathes in slow, steady tides, a living pulse that shapes every life along its shore. Here, between the grey sky and green earth, lived the coastal tribes, the Tlingit, the Haida, the Chinook, the Salish, and countless others whose lives followed the eternal conversation between forest and water. The Pacific coast was a place of sound, waves breaking against rock, wind sighing through cedar trees, gulls calling above the endless surf. Rain fell often, soft and constant, painting everything in shades of green and silver. To those who lived here, the sea was both a provider and a teacher. It could feed you with its abundance or take you without warning. To live by the ocean was to understand humility. Villages lined the shores, built of cedar planks, each longhouse carved and painted with symbols of lineage and myth. The cedar tree was sacred. It gave wood for houses, canoes and totem poles, bark for clothing, roots for baskets. To fell a cedar, prayers were offered first, and the first chip cut from the trunk was treated as a living being. The people called cedar the tree of life, and in their care it truly was. From those trees rose totems, tall, towering carvings that told the stories of families and spirits. Each totem was more than decoration, it was memory carved into matter. Bears, ravens, wolves, and eagles spiraled upward, their faces calm, watchful, eternal. They told of ancestors who became animals, of alliances, of lessons learned through generations. When a totem was raised, the village gathered to sing and feast, celebrating not wealth, but continuity, the unbroken line between past and present. The ocean provided endlessly. Canoes, long and narrow, carved from single cedar trunks, carried men far out into the waves to fish for salmon, halibut, and whale. The salmon was sacred, the giver of life. Its return each year marked the rhythm of survival. When the first salmon was caught, it was never eaten immediately. It was blessed, thanked, and returned to the sea so that the spirit of the fish would tell its kin that humans remained worthy of their gift. Women gathered clams and seaweed, dried berries and fish for the long winter months. Smokehouses filled the air with the scent of cedar and salt, and everything, absolutely everything, was used. The coastal people had no concept of waste. Even bones became tools, even shells became beads. The ocean gave, and they, in turn, gave back through ritual and respect. When storms came, they came like gods. The waves rose high and broke against the cliffs with the roar of thunder. In those moments, no one challenged the sea. Instead, they sat by their fires, listening. The storm was a voice, a reminder that power did not belong to humans alone. When the rain finally ceased and sunlight returned in slanted beams, the forests glistened as if newly born. Each evening, the long houses glowed from within. Fires burned low, and shadows danced upon the carved beams. Children listened to elders tell stories of Raven, the trickster, the bringer of light, who once stole the sun and scattered the stars. These tales, half myth, half truth, were the heartbeat of their world. Through them, the people remembered that life itself was a story constantly being retold between wind and water, earth and sky. The coastal tribes had no written alphabet, yet their memory was vast. Songs held maps, carvings held history. A single chant could describe the currents of the sea, the depth of hidden inlets, the behavior of animals, and the lineage of families stretching back centuries. Memory lived not on paper but in rhythm, passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, carried like driftwood on the tide. And when someone died, the people did not speak of endings. Death was seen as another voyage, another tide turning. Canoes were carved with care, bodies wrapped in woven blankets, and offerings of food and song sent with them into the great beyond. For those who remained, the world did not grow smaller. It grew quieter, a silence filled with gratitude. In the stillness of dawn, the sea would mirror the sky so perfectly that one could not tell where the earth ended and heaven began. Fishermen pushed their canoes gently into the water, paddling into the mist as if entering a dream. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and silent, each stroke of the paddle like a prayer. To live here was to accept rhythm as truth. The tides rose and fell, the seasons turned, and people followed along, neither rushing nor resisting. They knew that to fight nature was to lose oneself, but to move with it was to find peace. Even now, along the Pacific coast, you can still see them. Totems standing against the wind, carved eyes watching the horizon, remembering. The sea has changed, the forests have thinned, but the spirit that once spoke through rain and cedar still whispers through the fog. If you close your eyes and listen, truly listen, you might hear the same lullaby that guided their nights. The ocean's breath, steady and endless, singing softly. All things return. All things endure. All things are one. Chapter 6. The Northern Lights and the People of the Ice. Far above the forests and plains, beyond the mountains where the trees thin and disappear, the world becomes white, an expanse of silence and light. The air is sharper here, clearer, and every breath feels ancient. This is the land of the Inuit, the Yupik, and the Innu, the people of the north who learned to live where the sun sleeps long and the stars sing through the cold. In this world, the earth is not quiet because it is empty, it is quiet because it listens. Winter reigns for most of the year. Snow lies thick across the tundra, glinting like powdered glass beneath the moon. The ocean freezes at its edges, holding within it a heartbeat, the slow groan of shifting ice. And yet, within this frozen stillness, life persists. The people of the North understood that survival was not conquest but cooperation, a dance between body, instinct, and the will of the elements. Their homes, built from snow and patience, were called igloo, perfect domes formed from blocks of packed ice, each one cut and placed with mathematical grace. Inside, the air grew warm from seal oil lamps, and the walls glowed blue with captured light. Families huddled together, sharing heat, stories, and silence. The wind outside howled like a living creature, but within those curved walls there was peace, a peace born of understanding that warmth is not a luxury, but a miracle. The Inuit did not fear the cold, they studied it. They read the snow like scripture. Each flake, each drift, each shifting shadow told them where to travel, where to hunt, where to rest. Their world was made of movement. The migration of caribou, the breathing holes of seals, the return of whales through the ice channels in spring. Life was a circle of return, measured not by clocks but by the rhythm of the earth itself. They hunted with harpoons carved from bone, guided by stars and instinct. A single hunt might feed a village for weeks, but before the first strike, they spoke words of thanks. They believed every creature carried a spirit, not separate from their own, but part of the same eternal family. To take life was not to dominate, but to enter a covenant of gratitude. The hunter would kneel, his breath rising like smoke into the freezing air, whispering to the seal or whale, "Thank you for coming to me." Food, warmth, shelter, all came from the animals. The caribou gave hides for clothing. The seal gave oil for lamps. The whale gave bones for tools and homes. Every part of the creature was used, honored, returned to the cycle. Waste was unthinkable. In the Arctic, excess is not wealth, it is death. At night, the sky unfolded into a living fire. The aurora, ribbons of green and violet light, swayed across the heavens like the souls of ancestors dancing. The Inuit said that the northern lights were the spirits of the departed playing a game across the stars, using a walrus skull as their ball. Some believed the lights whispered messages. Others said they sang. But everyone stopped to watch them, feeling the hum of eternity ripple across the ice. Children grew up in this world of extremes. Laughter echoing in the snow, faces red from the wind, eyes bright with wonder. Their toys were carved from bone and driftwood. Their lullabies were not soft but steady, like the beat of a drum against a storm. They learned early that fear was a teacher, not an enemy. To walk upon the ice was to walk with respect. To survive was to belong. When spring arrived, the change was sudden, a flood of light, melting rivers, the return of birds. The people followed the rhythm, setting up tents made of animal skins, fishing through holes in the thawing ice, traveling by kayak across cold, shining waters. The land was still harsh, but in its brief generosity, it offered beauty that could break the heart. Sunlight on new ice, the sound of water waking from sleep, the call of the first goose flying north. The north taught that life is not about comfort but connection. When one lives so close to death, every breath becomes sacred. A shared meal, a warm touch, a silent glance, each carries meaning deeper than words. The people of the ice did not hoard or boast. They measured wealth by the warmth they gave, not the things they owned. In the long winter nights, when the world was nothing but dark and snow, they told stories of Sedna, the sea goddess who ruled the depths, her long hair flowing through the cold currents, of the raven who brought light to the world, of the shaman who could travel between realms by dream and drumbeat. The stories were not escape. They were survival. Words kept the soul warm when fire could not. Sometimes the wind would fall still. The stars hung close, and the silence felt so complete that one could hear their own heart moving inside the world's heart. It was then that the Inuit believed the universe listened back, that all living things from seal to sky shared the same breath. If you stood there on that endless snowfield, with the northern lights swirling above and the frozen sea stretching to the horizon, you would understand something profound. The North is not a place of absence. It is a place of presence, the purest kind. It strips life to its essence until what remains is truth, gratitude, endurance, humility, and awe. And as you close your eyes now, imagine that quiet, the soft crackle of ice, the gentle breath of wind, the distant song of the aurora. Let it wrap around you like a blanket of cold light. Feel the stillness not as emptiness but as peace, because in that silence, the world is not dead. It is alive, and it is listening. Chapter 7. The Rivers of the South and the People of the Sun. Before the highways and the farms, before the names Mississippi or Alabama were ever spoken, there were rivers that glimmered like living veins across the heart of the land. They wound through forests and swamps, carrying the breath of the South, warm, slow, heavy, with the scent of life. And along those waters rose a people who built with earth instead of stone, who prayed with rhythm instead of words, who lived by the sun and the river's pulse. They are now called the Mississippian people, the mound builders. From around the year 800 to the late 1400s, they created some of the most remarkable civilizations in North America. Their cities were made not of marble or brick, but of earth, sculpted by thousands of hands, shaped into great pyramids and platforms that rose above the floodplains like green hills made by gods. At the heart of their world stood Cahokia, near what is now St. Louis, a city older than London, alive with traders, farmers, and dreamers. Wooden palisades enclosed neighborhoods of wattle and daub homes. Smoke curled from hearths at dawn. Thousands gathered around a central plaza for festivals and ceremonies. Drums echoed, feathers shimmered in sunlight, and from the highest mound, priests watched the horizon for the first spark of morning light. Because to them, the sun was not a distant star. It was the face of creation itself. The rivers fed everything. They carried fish, fertile soil and stories. Canoes glided silently between villages, carrying shells from the Gulf, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from faraway mountains. Trade was not only about goods, it was about connection, a network of trust that linked peoples who might never meet but shared a sacred respect for the same waters. In the southern forests, the air was thick and alive. Cicadas sang in the trees. The scent of rain mingled with the sweetness of magnolia and pine. Life moved slower here, not from laziness, but from wisdom. The people knew that everything living followed the same rhythm: the river's rise, the corn's growth, the moon's turning. They didn't rush the world, they listened to it. Their homes were built close to the ground, round and humble, walls of clay and grass that breathed with the weather. Around them, gardens thrived: corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers. Children played near the water's edge, their laughter echoing across the reeds. Women tended the crops and wove baskets with patterns that mirrored the stars. Men fished, hunted, and built the earthen mounds that shaped their skyline, monuments that connected the living to the dead, the earth to the heavens. Each mound had meaning. Some were flat-topped, used for temples or homes of chiefs. Others were conical, burial mounds layered with offerings of shells, beads, and pottery for the journey beyond. When someone died, the community gathered to sing and dance, not to mourn loss, but to honor continuity. Death was not an ending. It was another curve in the river. Cahokia's people measured time by the sky. They built a circle of wooden posts, a great calendar of shadows, now called Woodhenge. When the sun rose at the solstice, its light aligned perfectly with the central mound, marking the turning of the seasons. Theirs was a science of reverence, a blend of astronomy, agriculture, and faith. The heavens told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to gather in gratitude. Night in the south was never truly dark. The air shimmered with fireflies, the river reflected the stars, and the forests whispered with unseen movement. Drums beat softly in the distance. The songs carried across water, rising and falling like breath, songs that spoke of ancestors who had become constellations watching from above. In these gatherings, the people danced barefoot upon the earth, feeling the heartbeat of the land through their souls. Every movement was prayer, every step was remembrance. The earth was not below them, it was within them. When floods came, and they always did, the people did not despair. They watched the river swell, accepted its power, and rebuilt when the waters receded. The mounds themselves were their protection, high ground against the river's will, proof that cooperation with nature could build eternity where defiance could not. And when droughts came, they sang for rain, not demanding, but asking, gently, humbly, with the same patience that had carried their ancestors through centuries. They believed that to live well was to live in balance, and that every storm, every flood, every change in the sky was part of the great circle that governed all things. Even now, the remnants remain. The mounds still rise from the earth, covered in grass, silent beneath the sun. Travelers pass by them without knowing, thinking they are natural hills. But the land remembers. Beneath those green slopes lie the bones of ceremonies, the ashes of fires, the footprints of a people who once looked at the same sky you see now and whispered the same prayer. Let the world remain kind. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing there beside the slow, brown river, the air heavy with warmth, cicadas humming in the distance. The light softens. The wind carries the smell of rain and earth. And somewhere beyond the trees a drum begins to beat, steady as your own heart. That rhythm, slow, ancient, unbroken, still moves through the soil of the south. You can feel it if you listen. It's the sound of continuity, of faith without temples, of time without hurry. It's the song of the people of the sun, and it has never stopped playing. Chapter 8. The Web of Trade and the Paths Between Worlds. The land was wide, but it was never lonely. Long before the wheels of wagons carved ruts into the soil, before ships from across the ocean drew lines of conquest on maps, the continent was already laced with invisible highways, rivers, trails, and wind-worn ridges that carried not soldiers or kings, but stories. These were the arteries of early America. Through them, goods traveled. But more importantly, so did understanding. From the misty forests of the east to the golden deserts of the southwest, people walked paths worn smooth by generations. Traders, messengers, dreamers, and healers moved across the land with baskets, beads, shells, and words. They did not call it commerce, they called it connection. Each journey was a conversation between nations, landscapes, and souls. Canoes slipped silently along the rivers, carved from tree trunks and polished smooth by time. On their bows, travelers carried obsidian from western volcanoes, copper from the northern lakes, shells from the southern coasts, feathers from distant mountains. To hold these items was to hold a fragment of another world, a reminder that everything was linked, even across vast distances. In the plains, trails of beaten grass stretched beyond the horizon. There were no signposts, no written maps, only memory and instinct. The travelers read the land, the bend of a river, the shape of a hill, the pattern of stars at night. The North Star guided them, constant and kind. Fires burned in camps each evening, and strangers became kin through shared bread and silence. The people of the Mississippi traded with those of the Great Lakes. The Pueblo met with tribes from the plains. The coastal nations sent canoes inland filled with salt, oil, and carved art that shimmered like the sea. Every exchange carried more than material wealth. It carried stories, songs, and ways of seeing the world. There was no single ruler of this web, no empire, no crown, no capital city. Yet it functioned with quiet precision. Each community offered what it had in abundance: corn, obsidian, turquoise, shells, tobacco, and received what it lacked. But beneath every transaction was gratitude, not greed. The people understood that taking without giving broke the harmony that held the world together. These trade routes were also spiritual roads. Along them traveled sacred objects, pipes carved from red stone, bundles of herbs, feathers blessed by shamans. To carry them was a form of prayer. Each traveler became a bridge between tribes, a bearer of peace. When two groups met, they did not begin with business. They began with ceremony, lighting fires, sharing songs, offering food, speaking blessings to the four directions. Only when the spirits were acknowledged did hands exchange goods. In this way, the land itself was woven together by respect. The rivers were its veins, the mountains its bones, the forests its breath. And humans were the blood that moved within it, not separate, but necessary, keeping the great body of the continent alive. Sometimes traders carried not goods but messages, warnings of drought, invitations to festivals, news of a new alliance or a coming storm. Their journeys were long, marked by danger, but the thought of service gave them courage. They were not traveling through the land, they were traveling with it. Resting at night beside a campfire, they would listen to the wind whisper through the grass and hear voices in it, voices of ancestors, of rivers speaking to one another. It was said that those who truly listened could understand what the land desired. That knowledge was the first wisdom, older than any book. At times these paths crossed places considered sacred, hills where lightning struck often, valleys where mist never lifted, stones carved by unknown hands. The travelers stopped there, leaving offerings of tobacco or beads, thanking the unseen for safe passage. These were not shrines of worship, but of remembrance, reminders that life was a circle of giving and returning. The routes also carried new ideas about medicine, agriculture, and art. One nation's method of planting corn became another's harvest ritual. A song from the coast could become a prayer in the mountains. In this way, culture was not guarded but shared, expanding like ripples in a pond. When you look at a map today, it is easy to see divisions, lines, borders, boundaries. But in the 15th century, the continent was one breathing whole. The people understood something modern minds often forget, that connection is older than competition, and cooperation is older than conquest. The network of trade, of travel, of trust, it was not made by rulers or armies. It was made by ordinary hands, by footsteps and paddles, by voices calling across water and wind. It was the unseen heart of early America, beating quietly for centuries before anyone came to rename it. Even now, if you stand by a river at dawn, you can feel it, that faint hum beneath the surface, that memory of movement. The water carries more than reflection. It carries history. It remembers the paddles, the prayers, the voices that once passed over it. And in that soft sound, as the sun rises and the mist lifts, you can still hear the ancient rhythm of exchange, not the kind measured by coins or contracts, but the kind that says, "I see you, you are part of me. Let us share the road and keep the world whole." Chapter 9. The Spirits of the Land. Before temples, before scripture, before written prayer, there was breath, the breath of the earth itself. And to the people of this continent, that breath was holy. Across the forests, plains, deserts, and ice, there ran a single quiet understanding that everything which existed, every river, every mountain, every stone, every creature, was alive with spirit. There were no boundaries between the sacred and the ordinary, because the sacred was everywhere. To walk, to plant, to drink, to dream, all were acts of communion. They called this force by many names: Manitou, Orenda, Wakantanka, the Great Mystery. But the meaning was always the same. The invisible thread that binds all things together, the pulse that moves through wind, fire, water, and heart. No one owned it. No one fully understood it. They simply lived within it, like fish in water, like leaves in wind. When the people rose each morning, they greeted the world not with demand, but with thanks, a whisper to the dawn. A handful of cornmeal scattered to the soil. A song offered to the rising sun. These small gestures were not ritual in the modern sense. They were reminders that to be alive was to be indebted to everything that made life possible. The spirits of the land were not distant gods sitting above the sky. They were immediate, woven into the rain, the fire, the breath of animals, the laughter of children. The people did not pray upward, they prayed outward into the world around them. They believed that every movement of nature was a message. The cry of a hawk, the fall of a leaf, the shift of a shadow, all carried meaning if one learned to listen. And so, they listened. They listened better than any people since. When sickness came, they did not seek blame. They sought balance. Shamans, medicine people, entered trances with drum beats, their voices rising and falling like wind through reeds. They spoke to the unseen, not as masters, but as messengers. Healing was not about conquering illness, but restoring harmony between body, mind, and spirit. The drum itself was sacred. Its beat was the heartbeat of the earth. When it sounded, the people felt connected not only to each other, but to every living thing. It was said that the spirits danced to its rhythm, drawn by its low, steady pulse. Fire, too, was alive. It was treated as a guest, fed carefully, spoken to with respect. When a fire was lit for council or ceremony, it was never left alone. Someone always tended it because the flame was more than warmth. It was presence, a light that linked this world and the next. Mountains were ancestors, rivers were veins of spirit, animals were teachers.
The wolf taught loyalty.
The eagle taught vision. The bear taught strength and solitude. Even the snake, feared by many, was honored as a symbol of renewal, for it shed its skin and began again.
Children learned these lessons not from books but from observation. They were told, "Watch the deer, it never eats more than it needs. Watch the tree, it bends with the wind and never breaks." Wisdom was not shouted, it was discovered in silence.
Every nation had stories of creation, but most began with the same image, that the world was built through cooperation, not domination. In one story, the earth was made when a great turtle rose from the water, carrying soil on its back, so that people might have a place to stand. In another, a sky woman fell from heaven and was caught by the animals before she could drown. They built land for her, grain by grain, and she became the mother of all living things. In these stories, even the smallest creature had purpose, even the humblest act was divine. The people believed that the spirit did not end with death. The soul returned to the cycle, into rivers, into stars, into the laughter of newborns. To live well was to prepare for that return, to keep one's spirit clean through generosity, truth, and respect. There was no fear of the afterlife, only the quiet hope that one's breath might become part of the wind again. At night, when the fires dimmed, they would gather beneath the sky, that vast cathedral of stars, and speak to their ancestors. Some used smoke, others used song, a few simply listened. It was said that if you stayed still long enough, you could hear the earth breathing beneath you. And in that breath, you could feel that you were not separate from anything. Not from the stone, not from the river, not even from the stars.
This was the great wisdom of the old world.
That life was not a hierarchy, but a circle. That everything given returns. That the earth is not a possession, but a relationship. Even now, when the forests have thinned and cities hum with electric light, this truth has not vanished. It lingers. In the wind, in the soil, in the echo of drums that still beat at powwows across the continent. The language of spirit is patient. It waits for ears quiet enough to hear it again. So as you lie here, listening to your own breath, imagine that it is part of something larger. A shared rhythm, ancient and unbroken. Feel the pulse beneath you, the warmth within you, the air around you. These are not separate things, they are one. And in that oneness, you are home. Chapter 10. The Seasons of Life. Time in the old America did not move forward like an arrow. It turned softly, like the wind shifting through the trees. The people of that land did not divide their lives by calendars or clocks, but by the rhythm of what was living, the return of birds, the thaw of rivers, the scent of rain, the angle of the sun.
To them, time was not a force to be conquered. It was a friend to be listened to.
The year unfolded like a song, 4 verses, each with its own melody. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. The same notes, always new, always returning. Spring, the awakening. When the first frost melted and the snow retreated into the shadows of trees, the world seemed to inhale again. Rivers broke free from their icy prisons. Sap rose in the maples. Birds returned from their southern journeys, their calls echoing like laughter across thawing meadows. The people called this the season of awakening, when the earth stretched after her long sleep. For farmers, it was the season of gratitude. Women pressed seeds into soft soil with careful hands, whispering thanks to the earth. The Iroquois offered maple festivals, thanking the trees for their sweetness. In the southwest, Pueblo farmers danced to invite gentle rains. In the north, hunters followed the returning herds, their steps soft, their prayers carried on the wind. The people did not hurry spring. They moved with it, preparing, mending, dreaming. They understood that to plant too early was as dangerous as planting too late. Patience was not weakness, it was wisdom. Summer, the season of labor and celebration. Then came summer, warm, bright, abundant. The world hummed with insects and growth. Corn stood tall, rivers ran full, and children played beneath canopies of green. It was the time of work, but also of joy. Villages came alive with sound, drums, laughter, and songs that carried into the long evenings. Summer was the season of gatherings. Tribes who had been separated by winter's hardships reunited under the open sky. They shared food, stories, and dances. Feasts were held to honor the sun, for without its light, nothing could live. The people did not worship the sun as a god, but as a great relative. Older, wiser, constant. Young men tested their strength in friendly games, elders shared counsel, women wove baskets painted with the patterns of rivers and clouds. It was a season of teaching, of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. The world was at its fullest, and so were their hearts. Autumn, the season of harvest and farewell. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky and the days softened into gold, the people turned to harvest. The air smelled of earth and smoke. Fields glowed with ripened corn and squash. Everywhere there was movement, gathering, storing, preparing. Autumn was the time of balance, light and dark in equal measure, a moment between abundance and rest. Communities came together to celebrate the year's success. Fires burned high, songs rose like migrating geese. The Iroquois held their great Thanksgiving ceremony, lasting days, offering gratitude for everything the earth had given. In the south, the mound builders gave thanks to the rivers that had sustained their crops. But autumn was also the season of farewell. Leaves fell like blessings from the trees. The old prepared for their journeys beyond, and the living spoke softly of remembrance. They believed the veil between worlds grew thin in these months, that ancestors walked more closely among the living. Lanterns and fires guided their spirits, and songs were sung to honor their return. It was a time of sweetness and sorrow when the beauty of life was felt most clearly because it was fading. Winter, the season of rest and story. Then the world grew still. Snow returned to the mountains, frost laced the rivers, and the nights deepened. Winter was not an enemy. It was a teacher. It taught stillness, endurance, and reflection. The people gathered indoors, in longhouses, in stone dwellings, in tents of hide and bone. Fires burned low, and around them the elders began to speak. This was the storytelling season, when words replaced the work of hands. Children listened wide-eyed as myths of creation, love, and courage were told again and again. Outside, the world slept. The animals burrowed deep. The rivers slowed to silence. Inside, life continued in whispers, mending tools, weaving clothes, shaping hope for spring. There was no rush, no panic. The people knew that even the coldest night was part of a promise, that warmth would return, that nothing beautiful ever truly ended. When storms came, they listened to the wind. Some said it was the voice of the ancestors. Some said it was the land dreaming. Either way, they stayed close, patient, and grateful. For even hardship carried wisdom. The circle without end. The seasons did not begin or end. They folded into one another endlessly. The year was not a line but a wheel, always turning, always bringing back what was lost. The people lived within that circle, never above it. To break it, to take without giving, to rush what needed time, was to break harmony itself. Each season taught something essential. Spring taught hope. Summer taught joy. Autumn taught gratitude. Winter taught faith. And together they formed the full story of being human. To grow, to give, to let go, and to rest. Even now, though the cities have risen and the old calendars have been forgotten, this rhythm still beats beneath everything. The rivers still thaw, the corn still grows, the stars still return in their appointed season. If you step outside some quiet night, you might feel it, the same pulse that guided the people of the past. It moves in the air, in your breath, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The seasons are still turning. And they are waiting for you to remember how to turn with them. Chapter 11. The Way of Community. If the land was the body of the world, then the people were its heartbeat. They lived not as individuals chasing solitary dreams, but as threads in a great woven fabric. Each life crossing another, binding, strengthening, belonging. In the 15th century, across the forests, plains, deserts, and coasts, life was sustained not by wealth or walls, but by community. The village, the clan, the family, these were the true nations, where survival and spirit flowed through cooperation, not competition. The circle of belonging. From birth, every person knew their place in the circle. No one was born into isolation. Everyone was born into relationship. A newborn's first cry was met not only by parents, but by the entire village, elders blessing its breath, women singing lullabies of protection, men carving small gifts from bone or wood as tokens of welcome. A child belonged not just to a mother and father, but to the tribe itself. In the longhouses of the Iroquois, in the pueblos of the southwest, in the teepees of the plains, children moved freely between households. Every adult was a teacher, every elder a keeper of wisdom. No door was closed to them, no meal eaten alone. The people believed that strength did not come from independence, but from interdependence. The quiet trust that one's neighbor would share food in winter, guard the fire during storms, and teach a skill when the young were ready to learn. It was said, "A single stick breaks. A bundle does not." That was the first law of the people. The balance of the feminine. In many nations, women held power not as rulers, but as roots. Among the Iroquois, clans were matrilineal. Family traced through the mother's line. Women chose the chiefs, guided councils, and held the right to remove leaders who forgot humility. They were the stewards of life, tending crops, preserving seeds, keeping the knowledge of medicine and birth. To dishonor women was to dishonor the earth itself, for both gave nourishment without demand. Men hunted, built, and defended, but they did so in harmony with the wisdom of women, whose patience shaped the rhythm of survival. The balance between them was sacred, not rivalry, but reflection. The masculine carried the fire, the feminine carried the flame's meaning. The counsel and the word. Every decision, great or small, was made not by decree but by dialogue. The council fire was the heart of governance, a circle of equals where every voice was heard. Elders spoke first, their words slow, measured, deliberate. Each syllable considered like a stone placed carefully in a river. Then came the voices of the middle-aged, those in the labor of life, and finally, the young ... Not to challenge, but to learn the art of listening. Silence was not awkward, it was sacred space, the moment in which truth had time to surface. A decision reached in haste was thought to offend the spirits, for wisdom needed patience and unity was worth more than victory. The Iroquois great law of peace taught that. Leaders must have a skin 7 spans thick. Thick enough to resist anger, thin enough to feel compassion. To govern was to serve, not to command. The feast and the fire. Food was not a possession, it was a bond. When a hunt succeeded, the meat was shared. When crops ripened, they were distributed among all. No one was praised for generosity because giving was expected, as natural as the river flowing to the sea. Feasts were not displays of wealth, but of gratitude. They marked every rhythm of life: birth, first hunt, harvest, healing, marriage, and death. The act of eating together was a prayer: we live because we share. At night, after the feasting, when bellies were full and laughter echoed through the dwellings, someone would begin a song. Then another voice joined, and another, until the air itself seemed to breathe with the people. The song might be of love, of loss, or of the moon's slow rise. But beneath it all was the same steady truth, that to sing together was to remember that no one stands alone. The bonds of trade and marriage. Between nations, alliances were sealed not with signatures but with shared lives. Marriages joined distant tribes. Trade strengthened friendships. Gifts were given not to earn favor but to honor connection. A shell, a blanket, a piece of carved wood. Each gift carried meaning far beyond its form. It said, "I see you. I trust you. Our fates are woven together." The wampum belts of the northeast, strands of white and purple shell were both currency and covenant. Their patterns recorded peace treaties, spiritual lessons, and memories of kinship. Each bead represented a promise, and to break it was to wound the spirit of the land itself. The education of the heart. The young were not taught by lecture, but by example. They watched, they listened, they imitated. A boy learned to hunt by following in silence, to carve by feeling the rhythm of the knife. A girl learned to plant by touching the soil, to sing by matching the voice of her mother. Discipline was gentle. When a child erred, no one shouted. Instead, the elders told a story. A tale of someone long ago who made the same mistake and learned from it.
The story did the teaching.
The child did the understanding. Every lesson pointed back to the same center. Respect for life, respect for others, respect for self. These were not commandments carved in stone. They were living truths, breathed and practiced daily. The hidden harmony. The people did not seek perfection. They sought balance. There were quarrels, envy, mistakes, but each was resolved through talk, song, or shared labor. Forgiveness was practical, for bitterness wasted energy that survival required. To live in community was to live with humility, to accept that no one person carried all wisdom, that the strength of the group
was the sum of every voice, every flaw, every gift.
When the fire burned low at night and the stars shimmered above the open plains, you could hear a stillness between the crackle of wood, a silence full of understanding. It was the sound of people who knew that happiness was not something to chase, but something built, hand by hand, story by story, around the glow of a common flame. Even now, when the noise of modern life scatters hearts into separate rooms, somewhere deep beneath it, that same rhythm of community still beats. Steady, patient, waiting. Because the human heart remembers what the world forgets, that peace begins not in solitude, but in belonging. Chapter 12. The Coming of Shadows. The wind began to change. It carried a new scent. Salt, iron, and smoke. At first, it was nothing more than rumor in the air, a whisper across the water, a strange bird sighted on the horizon. The old rhythm of the land continued. Fires were lit, seeds were sown, drums beat softly through the night. But beneath that steady music, something unseen had begun to stir. The year was near the end of the 15th century. Across the vast ocean, in lands unseen by those who lived here, sails were being raised, compasses set, and hearts filled with hunger. Not the hunger of the stomach, but of conquest, gold, and the myth of discovery. To the people of the forests and plains,
there was no such thing as new land.
The world had always been whole, but far away, others had begun to dream of dividing it. The first signs came softly. Strange pieces of wood washed up on distant shores. Foreign birds flew in from the east. Fishermen spoke of seeing something on the horizon, a line of wings that did not move, a shape that did not belong. And one morning, in a place where the sea kissed the sand with its endless patience, someone saw the white sails appear. They did not know they were looking at history beginning to shift. They thought perhaps they were clouds. The ships came slowly, heavy with dreams. Men aboard them carried not just tools and goods, but ideas of ownership, hierarchy, conversion, and empire. They came seeking a world they believed was lost, and in their arrival, they would make others lose theirs. But in this first moment, before the noise and the fire, before the maps were drawn and the names were changed, there was still wonder. The people on the shore watched the tall ships drift closer, their wooden bodies groaning like living things. They wondered what kind of wind could move such beasts, what kind of people could cross the endless sea. They did not yet see threat, they saw mystery. The visitors stepped onto the sand and looked around, as if they had arrived in a dream. To them, the land seemed untouched, unclaimed, its rivers unwritten, its forests nameless. But the earth they stood upon already carried 1,000 stories, 1,000 years of prayer and laughter and birth. They did not hear them. They were listening only for their own echo. At first, there was exchange. Shells for glass beads, corn for cloth. Curiosity bridged the silence of language. Hands pointed, eyes met, gifts were given. The people of the land offered food and shelter, not because they feared, but because hospitality was sacred. To feed a stranger was to honor the Great Spirit. To share was to keep the world in balance. But balance, once shaken, is hard to restore. More ships followed, more strangers. More words that sounded like commands. The rhythm of trade turned into the rhythm of demand. Where once there was equality, there grew confusion. The visitors spoke of land as property, of the sky as territory, of God as ruler. They spoke of kings across the ocean, of ownership, of borders, concepts that had no roots in this soil. Still the people listened.
They tried to understand.
They wondered how anyone could claim what belongs to everyone. The river, the mountain, the light. They wondered why the visitors carried weapons even when offered peace. They wondered what kind of hunger it was that no meal could satisfy. Slowly, the harmony that had held the continent for centuries began to tremble. Forests were cut for timber. Animals once hunted with gratitude were slaughtered for trade. The drums of the villages were drowned out by the sound of hammers and axes. Yet even then the people did not hate. They mourned, they prayed, they remembered. They said, perhaps this too is part of the circle. Perhaps the earth will teach them what they have forgotten. Perhaps the land itself will guide them back to balance. But as years passed, the circle broke. Fire spread where peace once walked. Diseases came in silence, faster than words could travel. Entire nations vanished before anyone knew their names. The rivers ran as they always had,
but fewer voices sang beside them.
The sky remained blue, but the songs beneath it had changed. And still, in small corners, hope refused to die. Somewhere in a longhouse, an elder told the old stories. Somewhere in the desert, a potter shaped clay as her ancestors had. Somewhere in the plains, a hunter whispered thanks to a dying bison. The land remembered, and so did those who refused to forget. The coming of the shadows did not erase the light. It only taught it to burn quieter, deeper, hidden within memory. So when you walk this land today, when you cross its fields, its cities, its rivers, you are walking through echoes of that first silence, that first meeting between wonder and sorrow. The wind that touches your face
has passed through the same forests that once heard the first drums.
It carries the same prayer that balance may one day return, and that the earth, though wounded, will forgive. Chapter 13. The Memory of the Earth. Even after centuries of change, after iron replaced stone and maps covered rivers with names that were never theirs, the earth did not forget. It remembered every footstep that had ever touched it, every song that had ever risen into its air, every fire that had ever glowed against its night. Time reshaped the land, but beneath the highways and towers, beneath the fields of corn and the quiet back roads, the bones of the old world still rest. The mounds, the stone circles, the buried hearths, the remnants of prayers whispered to dawn.
The earth remembers because it listens differently than we do.
It keeps the weight of memory in silence, in the way the soil holds warmth after a long day, in the way rivers carve the same paths no matter what names we give them, in the way the wind still sings through the grass of the plains. As it did when no one called this place America. When settlers ploughed the ground, their blades sometimes caught against pottery fragments, arrowheads, or beads. To them these were curiosities, but to the land they were echoes. Each fragment was a word in a long conversation between human and earth, a language we once spoke fluently and have since forgotten how to hear. But memory never truly dies. It waits, it hides in the hush before dawn, in the shadow between two waves, in the soft hum of insects at night. Those who listen, really listen, can still feel it, the old presence, the pulse beneath the noise of the modern world. Stand in a forest long enough,
and the air will begin to breathe with you.
Stand beside a river, and its surface will seem to shimmer, not with reflection, but with recognition. The land has not stopped speaking. It has only grown patient. The descendants of the first peoples still walk here. Their languages, though once silenced, are rising again. Children learn songs their great-grandparents were forbidden to sing. Drums, once buried in fear, now echo openly beneath open skies. Powwows fill the air with color and rhythm.
And through those dances, the past reaches into the present.
Not as nostalgia, but as endurance. Because memory is not only what we keep,
it is what refuses to be erased.
The mountains still hold their names in older tongues, soft syllables carried by wind. The rivers still carry the same currents that once mirrored the stars. The buffalo have returned to the plains, the salmon swim again in rivers once poisoned, and the northern lights still paint the same stories across the Arctic sky. Nature does not forget its children. It waits for them to remember it. Even the cities, for all their light and noise, cannot drown out the earth's pulse completely. If you walk down a quiet street at night, you can sometimes feel it. A vibration beneath the concrete, a heartbeat too slow to measure, too old to name. It is the memory of the land remembering itself through you. We have built walls, borders, machines, but beneath all that, the same ground breathes, and it whispers gently to any who pause long enough to listen, I am still here. You are still mine.
The story continues.
In the deserts of the southwest, you can still hear the wind move through the canyons like a flute. In the forests of the east, you can still smell the cedar that built longhouses centuries ago. In the north, the ice still cracks under the same stars that guided the Inuit home. And in the south, the mounds still rise like sleeping giants, holding inside them the memory of the first cities. These are not ruins. They are reminders that nothing sacred ever truly vanishes. The earth remembers its children even when they forget their mother. And perhaps that is the quiet mercy of creation, that the ground we walk upon forgives the footsteps that wound it. When you breathed the air that fills your lungs once moved through the forests of the 1400s. when you drink the water that touches your lips once rained upon ancient crops. When you sleep, the stars above you are the same ones that watched the first fires burn. We are not after the past. We are within it, and so the story continues, not in books, but in wind and soil and the rhythm of our hearts. The land does not demand sorrow for what was lost. It asks only for recognition, for the return of listening,
For the humility of belonging.
because the earth remembers.
It always has.
And in that remembering, it keeps us alive,
Still turning.
still breathing, still capable of beginning again. Chapter 14. The Circle Returns. Night comes quietly now, not as darkness, but as rest. The stars rise like slow embers above the land,
And the wind moves through the grass with the same voice it had 1,000 years ago.
It hums through cities and forests, over mountains and rivers, touching everything that still remembers how to listen. The story, like the earth, was never meant to end. It only turns, and in its turning, the circle returns. The old ones used to say that everything the world forgets eventually finds its way back. A song once buried in silence becomes a heartbeat in a child. A river once dammed finds another path. A people once scattered return through memory, through language, through the quiet persistence of love.
The land does not hold grudges. It waits. It waits for the sound of footsteps that come not to take but to walk gently.
It waits for the fires lit, not for conquest but for warmth. It waits for the hands that once carved the soil to return not as owners but as kin. You can feel it even now, beneath the hum of modern life, the slow healing of the earth, forests reclaiming what was cut, rivers finding their old beds, people learning again that belonging is not something we inherit from maps or nations, but from how we listen to the land that cradles us. To live well in this world, the old people would say, is to remember that everything you touch touches you back. Every kindness ripples outward. Every careless act leaves a shadow. But the earth, in her mercy, gives us another chance with every sunrise. No day is beyond forgiveness. Somewhere in the plains, the buffalo move again, their hooves beating the earth like drums. Somewhere in the north, the aurora dances, the spirits painting light upon the sky. Somewhere in the desert, the wind carves songs through red stone. And somewhere in the east, a child stands beneath the forest canopy, listening to the rustle of leaves, hearing, perhaps for the first time, that the world is alive. The circle is not a symbol. It is the truth of existence, birth and decay, loss and return, sorrow and renewal. We are always leaving and coming back,
Forgetting and remembering.
breaking and healing. And when you listen closely, beneath all the noise and distance of our age, you will hear the same slow rhythm that guided the first heart. The pulse of the land, steady, forgiving, ancient. It says,
You are not separate.
you never were. All things end so that all things may begin again. Now, as you lie here, let your thoughts drift like leaves on the water. Let the noise of the world dissolve into silence. Breathe in and feel the memory of forests, oceans, and mountains within that breath. Breathe out.
And give something back, even if only gratitude.
The stars above you are the same ones the ancestors knew. The wind that brushes your face has passed over their fires, And somewhere in that shared air, their stories still move, soft, patient, eternal. Rest in that.
You do not need to hold the world holds you.
The circle turns and you are part of its turning. So sleep now,
Not as one who escapes the day.
but as one who returns home to it. The land will remember you, the river will carry your dreams. The stars will watch over your rest, and when you wake, you will rise with the light. Another thread in the endless weave of time. Another note in the song that never truly ends. The circle has returned, and it will never stop turning. End of Before America Had a Name, Life on the Land in the 15th Century. A Meditative History for Sleep by Lunar Lullaby.